Okay.
Hello, everyone. It is Shayna Rattler, and welcome back to this episode of a God Shift podcast. If you'll do me a favor, as I ask every time, if you would take a screenshot of wherever it is that you are listening to this episode. And then when you take that screenshot, if you will post it on social media and then tag us here at a God Shift, I would really appreciate it because it helps us to get the podcast into the hands of more people. So I am going to read the bio of today's guest, and then we will get into a little bit of her God shift journey. I'm excited to hear about exactly how God has used things in her life. So Rachel Engstrom has written a groundbreaking memoir, and I just love the name of it. So the name of her book is called Wife, Widow, Now What? How I navigated the cancer world and how you can too. And Lord knows there's so many people who have been affected by cancer. But anyway, I digress. So she wrote this book on her experience as a young cancer wife, then widow. With the increasing number of young women and men becoming widows and widowers due to not only cancer and serious illnesses, but also now COVID-19, this resource is needed now more than ever. Rachel shares her journey in a raw and honest way while providing step-by-step resources to help you navigate your own journey. Never before has there been a combination of the personal grit of the healthcare journey, along with steps on how to navigate treatment, diagnosis, the ins and outs of hospital life, employment, finances, insurance, self-care, grief and loss, and much more. So welcome to the show, Rachel Engstrom.
Thank you for having me here.
How are you today, Rachel?
Good. I am blessed. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm about to be 39. I live in the Twin Cities area. I moved here at 18, not knowing one person, to go to the University of Minnesota, and I met a guy and ended up staying. I've spent the last 13 and a half, 14 years in social services. So I have my master's in social work. I've worked in direct practice, helping physically, mentally ill people out in the community. And currently I work for a health insurance company, getting people connected to counseling and helping triage substance abuse and mental health issues.
I love that. Such courageous work. I have a past in healthcare as well, 17 and a half years as a home health occupational therapist. So I understand everything physically, mentally, and psychologically that it takes to work in the healthcare world. So kudos to you for that. So for people who are listening to this podcast for the first time, I think it's important that I define what a God shift is. And my definition of a God shift is a moment that a disruption in your life collides with God's purpose, but then it ultimately gets you into a greater destiny. So can you ever think of a time that you were experiencing some form of disruption, whether it was a setback, a disappointment, some level of uncertainty, anything like that?
Oh, yes. So when I was 28 years old in 2010, I actually found out via having a horrific, painful pelvic episode of what I learned was endometriosis. I learned at 28 that I may not be able to have children, kind of just having to give that all to God, having lots of depression, anxiety, things like that. And then I thought, okay, I'm getting through this. I'm on some meds, different things, whatever happens, I'm going to give it to God. Then on New Year's Eve, 2010, my husband that I had been with, we'd been married 6 years together, 9. So I met him when I was 19. And he was about to be 26. So we are 28 and 35 at the time. We have Chinese food on New Year's Eve, and he gets a fortune cookie that says you're about to have a major life change. And then 15 days later, he is diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So I am thrown into the world of cancer, whether I like it or not. As soon as we found out, we just prayed, gave it all to God, knew somehow we would get through it. We wouldn't know what that would be, but we'd get through it. And I had to figure out how to navigate insurance, disability, the Family Medical Leave Act, all these things, work 8 hours, run home, let the dog out, then run to the hospital, be there for a couple hours, all of these things. And this became my real normal life for 2 years and 3 months. And
Wow.
then, we'll get into the different aspects and questions you have around that. But ultimately, 2 days after I turned 31, April 21st, 2013, I had to take the love of my life, my best friend, everything that I'd known as an adult. I had to take him off life support because his body just gave out from the side effects of chemo and radiation and after his bone marrow transplant for his leukemia. And I had to reboot my life like a computer. I'd had to start over. This is not what I planned. 6 months after he died, I could barely walk. I had so much pelvic pain. So then I had a hysterectomy. So then there's a whole nother level of grief and loss. And I just, one thing that I'm very proud of by the grace of God is never once did I doubt God's plan for me. I never got angry at God, all those types of things you hear that people do when someone dies, because I knew no matter what, I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And the poem Footprints has always been my toehold. I knew God has never dropped me. He never will. But it was sure really hard at times. And going through this catastrophic loss and this grenade that blew up my life, I had these experiences of, when you have like an upcoming vacation and say you have 7 days and you don't know what it looks like, but it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. And then you think, okay, I'm on the vacation. I have 4 days left. I have 3 days left. It was kind of like that, where you have the unknown path in front of you, but it was like, how do I pay for this house that I thought someone else would help me pay for? How do I go on and create this whole new life? And I just kept trusting in God, but I never really knew what would happen. And then a year after, my husband had, go ahead.
Pause 1 second.
Yeah.
Because what I love about what it is that you're saying, and what I want to make sure that people understand and that we unpack, is that most times in life, we get a whisper, then we get a voice, and then we get a scream that are like reminders and like constant in your face. You literally went from one day everything was fine to boom, the next day it wasn't, and then just kind of snowballing from there, right?
Yeah.
So how, but before we get too deep into, why God did what he did, why he had to allow that to happen, I would love for you to share how you respond when you don't have time to prepare, because the contrast of the story of what the vacation is like, it's coming and you're like, time is running out, so here's the things that I still have to do. But how do you respond when you don't have the little nudges and breadcrumbs along the way to follow, that like, oh, maybe this is something I should pay attention to?
The really tricky part, and the more I talk about this, the more I'm able to, God's gifting me, different words and scenarios to be able to think about things, is when you're the spouse or significant other and this happens to you, you don't have the luxury to think things might not be okay. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh my gosh, don't die, don't die, don't die. Then you have to figure out all the logistical things and work and balancing all of that. But I was trusting in God that no matter what, I would be okay, because I had to be the strong one that was the team manager, the support person, the cheerleader, the strong one. So I didn't have the luxury of thinking there was any other option than he would be fine.
Sure.
So within that, I just gave it all to God and was running on pure adrenaline. And even looking back at pictures or my notes or whatnot, so in this book that I've created, it's my chronological post of Caring Bridge, where if you're not familiar with it, it's a site that's like a journal update. You can email people, so then they are familiar with it. You're not getting inundated with text, emails, how's it going, da 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 da. It's whenever you do a new post, people get it. So my book is the Caring Bridge post, my Facebook post, later healing blog post, with my narrative. And then when I'm navigating insurance, I'm explaining how to do it. So it's a toolbox, how to navigate all of it step by step, because when you're going through it, you're just you're like in this numb survival world of trying to figure
Right.
it out. So
Right.
in doing that, it was really interesting because you're just on autopilot. It's kind of like, when you're driving and then you snap back into focus and you're like, how did I get from here to there? It was that type of thing all the time.
Wow. Wow.
Hmm.
So I say that the reason why God gives us disruption, the reason why he gives us unexpected circumstances, whether they're positive or negative, is to get our attention.
Right.
There's something that he wants us to see, there's something he wants us to learn, or, there's somewhere that he needs us next. So, why do you think, for you personally, that God had to use this dramatic disruption? Like, what was he trying to get you to learn?
I think, it's really tough to articulate, like, why are we here in the United States where we have access to all these amazing things when other places in the world they do not, right? In the grand scheme of things, it does not make sense that I lost my husband when I was 31 and he was 37, but I feel immensely grateful that I was able to be with him. Later, as a young widow, there were widow groups and different things I would try to find support on Facebook, and there were women who their person got back from Afghanistan and they took their lives. They couldn't handle the depression, the PTSD, all those things.
Right.
So I feel like big pieces of grace along the way for me is that I was able to be with him. He
Mm.
worked nights the whole time we were together until he got sick. And this allowed us actual time to be together. And I remember saying something like, these last 2 years have been really hard, but they've been beautiful. And his mom was like, what are you talking about? She was a very negative person in my life, but she was like, what are you talking about? And we were like, we've been able to spend time together. And it would be like, the nurses told us one time, we refer to you guys as the lovebirds in your apartment because I brought lamps and different things and, set it up. And I'd be on my cot like 2 feet lower on the floor than his bed. We'd be holding hands and watching movies and stuff.
Right.
But it was just that time, so none of it really made sense. But I knew that, for me, it was there's the science world and the medicine world. And I believe God creates them all, but it would be praying for the medical staff for their expertise and the gifts that they've been given. And I really, very, of course, believe in the word, but the saying God doesn't give us more than we can handle. I think sometimes we are given a lot more than we can probably handle. But for me, the whole thing was the grace. I was given the grace how to deal with it. My brother, that's 14 years older than me, said in the very beginning, you can choose to be better or bitter. And for better or worse, I chose better. And, I had some bitter days as a widow because it was unjust and not fair. And I was robbed and all these things were taken from me, my whole future or what I thought or what I knew. But I think, God placed this in my life for me to, with this book, like a year after he died, I thought, I have to write this down. This was so hard. And I was so alone and so isolated. And I mean, being 28, having friends that can't relate to being a cancer wife, try 31 people
Mhm.
that can't relate to being a widow, right? So it by writing this book, it was like I believe it was like this is my ministry to tell people it's hard. I am so sorry. It does not make it any easier, but I've been there and this is my true gritty story with resources on those anniversaries, those birthdays, all those things coming up. These are tips of how things might be more helpful because I really truly believe that like people used to mine in the Yukon and the Klondike back in the day for those little nuggets of gold and they'd put it all on the line. More than likely, all the difficult things that you're going through, you're going to find some nuggets of gold that God is placing there that it doesn't make it any easier, but you're more than likely going to have something that's applicable to move on later to empower you to help other people.
That's what I was thinking the whole time that you were talking, is that sometimes it's not always like one thing that you can pinpoint that you
Mm-hmm.
personally had to learn about the situation. Oftentimes the things that we go through are so that we can help others that come along behind us that are experiencing the exact same thing. So let's talk about your relationship with God during this time. So one of the things that I believe firmly is that when we're trying to accomplish anything in life, especially when we're trying to overcome the types of crisis and devastation that you found yourself dropped into, that it's
Sure.
really important to elevate God's position in your life. Why do you think that that's important?
Yeah, I think that, it's not easy to praise God all the time when you're going through really tough things, but to ultimately know that he sacrificed his son and that went through the hardest, worst thing ever.
Mhm.
And my husband had a really strong faith as well. And he did extra bone marrow biopsies and spinal taps. And he ultimately donated his body to the University of Minnesota. And all of these things he did to help other people. And within seeing that, like, I remember him telling me one time that, when he's having this hollow 8-inch needle ground into his lower hip to pull out marrow, he would just pray and he'd think about Jesus. And this is probably sounds like kind of a weird analogy, but I have like a gigantic blessed written tattooed on my arm and different things. But I remember, for anybody who's had a tattoo, it's very, very painful. All of mine are very meaningful. I have strength, faith, courage on one arm, things like that. But after he died, I got a gigantic peacock feather on my leg that says serendipity, because despite horrible things happen, good things were still happening that God was putting in my life. And I remember laying there in pain as a new widow and thinking, Jesus was crucified. This is nothing. We have like one millionth of what he went through. And just being able to recognize and know, despite how horrible our circumstances are, we are fallen people. We are not perfect. We are never going to be perfect, but the one person that is perfect has a plan for us, and
Yeah.
it's not going to make sense. And the trickiest part is, we want to know what's in the trailer for our movie. We
Yeah.
want to know what those blueprints are, but we don't have privy to that. So, but the other thing is, if we don't lean on God so much, we're not going to, you know, I'm not articulating this well, but like, we wouldn't, if tough things didn't happen, we wouldn't need God as much as we do.
Absolutely. And not only would we not need him, but if he did give us the trailer, if he did show us what the end was going to be, we would have the opportunity to prepare and do everything in our own way and get in our own way. And we would never be able to learn his goodness. And the
Right.
goodness that we see when we're in the middle of this, you know, unpleasant time is what allows us the next time that we go through something to go, wow, if he did it then, he'll do it now. You know, if he demonstrated those character traits before, I'm sure that I would be able to see those character traits again, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if he showed it to us, we quit. Like we'd be like, oh, I'm gonna find a way out of this, right?
Right. You're like, nope, next stop, detour.
Exactly. So we're going to pause for a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to share some advice of
Okay.
how people who are listening to this episode can accomplish some of the things that you were able to accomplish and maybe develop some of the spiritual maturity that you were obviously able to demonstrate at that time. So, this episode is brought to you by the free guide When God Says Shift. Inside, you'll discover the 4 shifts required to follow God's plan to move you out of disruption and into a greater destiny, expectancy, and possibility. Head to GodSaysShift.com to access it now. So, before that break, Rachel, I mentioned spiritual maturity. And the reason why I said that is because how mature of it was it of you at the tender age of not even 30 years old to be able to say, my life was changed in mere seconds. My husband was stripped from my life. He went through physical pain prior to passing. I'm going through physical, mental, emotional pain now that he has passed. But yet, in the middle of all of that, you were still able to say, but Jesus was crucified, and this is nothing in comparison to that, right? So, if someone is listening to this episode and they're like, okay, well, I'm struggling to overcome disruption. I'm struggling to elevate God's position in my life. I'm struggling to be able to have that level of spiritual maturity in the middle of my own situation. What advice would you give them of how they can begin to kind of take this God shift on with some level of grace and ease?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is like in my book, I mean, it's all in real time and order. Cause I had some days where I'm like, oh my gosh, today's a great day. It's 3 months out. And the next day I'm like, I can't stop crying. And that's the thing is, as we know, it says is when you make plans, God laughs, and it's not funny at the time, but it is in the grand scheme of things because
Yeah.
you just really can't pre-plan. And I had so many times where, I like later and this will all wrap up to what you're saying. Like I met my husband when I was 19. So I'm in my early mid 30s now, trying to date again, trying to run, having three part-time jobs, trying to keep my house, all these different things, not necessarily making the smartest choices, but believing that God had a plan, has the master plan. I don't get it. I don't know it, but I have to just surrender to it. And in part of that is you really do have to be able to hear him and listen and know those things. You have to give yourself grace to know that when you're going through something tough, the hardest thing is there's not a timeline. People are going to tell you there's a timeline. They're going to tell you kind of sometimes maybe suck it up. They're going to tell you, I had someone really close in my life say, Rachel, you should just decide to be happy. And it was like, that's not natural. That's not, and you're not in my space.
And it's not
My
that simple.
shoes.
You don't just be like, you know what? Yep, today I'm just going to be happy.
Right. So one of the things I would always do is I would read every night before I went to bed, Sarah Young's Jesus Calling. And I would be crying, but just almost laughing because it was so applicable to whatever I was going through that day. And I think the biggest thing that you can do is surround yourself with positivity. There are so many sad types of music, sad shows, sad media, all of those things within my depression and grief and bereavement and bitterness at what happened to me. I took a reprieve off social media. For me, it was very difficult to be 31. My husband is gone and I can't have babies, and everyone's posting all their personal things. I think that a really big thing you can do for yourself is take a break from all those things. Surround yourself with funny shows. I remember watching Friends and Frasier and Everybody Loves Raymond and just having belly laughs and discovering the joy I could have again and being like, all right, God, I hear you. I get it. Those types of things, and in realizing you can have those shifts even within having an awful day, even if it's a 10% shift by surrounding yourself with positivity. And
Yeah.
one of the really tough things that had to happen for me in my life is a year or so after my husband died, I had a friend that I had had for 12 years that was a best friend, and I was going to be in her maid of honor in her wedding. And she just became very toxic and judgmental. And I just had to end that relationship. And she was like family, but you really do have to pick and choose who you surround yourself with,
Yeah.
because God places people in different moments in your life. And what was really hard for me is I lost a lot of friends after the death of my husband, because a lot of people just don't know what to do with a 31-year-old widow. But
Yeah.
what I did find is through the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society marathon training programs and things that I did, I had new friends come in, ended up being people of faith as well. Now, 8 years later, these people are prayer warriors. We are together. They're ladies that are, 20 years older than me. I probably wouldn't have hung out with otherwise.
Yeah.
That we go for walks all seasons here in Minnesota. And God had a plan, not that you need or want to weed out people in your life, but it's one of those things that, when you have a job, you have your work friends. Then you leave that your job and you're like, I don't really talk to them anymore. We have these seasons in our life, people in our life, things in our life. And the best thing you can do for yourself is surround yourself with the appropriate people that will build you up, not break you down. And the same thing is what you're exposing yourself through media wise, social media wise as well. You have to make those choices to step away from those things that are more harmful than helpful.
Absolutely. I love that. You need to make room for not only what you need, but also for what it is that God is trying to do. So, as we
Yeah.
begin to wrap up, is there any final words or any final comments that you would like to add, or anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just know that it's not going to make sense. Tough things are not going to make sense. They're not supposed to make sense. If they did, we would have, those whatever those it makes me think of the movie Back to the Future where he gets the scorebook of all the football games back in time or whatever, those types of things, if you know what I'm talking about, or like the farmer's almanac, all those like wizardry type things. If we knew, like what you're saying, if we knew, we wouldn't need that guidance. And you just have to lean into God and be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And it does not feel good all the time.
Right.
But if you can do
Right.
that, God gives you unlimited amounts of resilience, strength, grace. And my book is just really a testament to the fact that I had the worst thing in the world happen to me. And I'm here now, um, as a, can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm here now as someone almost 8 years after he's died. Now I'm going from this widow that's in despair to I'm running this campaign in the state of Minnesota trying to raise $60,000 for blood cancer in my late husband's name
Yeah.
and putting my life and my story and everything out there. And I never thought that I would be an advocate in this way, but God said, Rachel, I am so sorry, but use your skills, use your gifts. And I think the most powerful thing for listeners for you to know is there's a plan, and what you're going through, there is a greater plan. And even if it just affects one person that you can
Yeah.
say, I've been there, I get it. It's really powerful, and God has amazing surprises for you.
Yes. What an awesome God shift story. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, how can people find you? And is there anything that you would like to offer the listeners?
Yeah, so you can find me on Wife Widow Now What on Facebook and Instagram. I actually have like a little private group on there as well through Facebook, a little support group if you have questions, you want to ask anything. Do lots of positive posting, articles, whatnot. You can donate through May 21st to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and through those links. And you can find Wife Widow Now on Amazon. And I really felt so alone when I was going through it. And I'm just really, really proud of the gifts that God has given me to help other people as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening, I will make sure that the links are in the show notes to both where you can find her on social media and also where you can get the book as well, so that you're not like digging around and did wife come first? Did what come first? So I'll make sure that I make that easy for you. So, Rachel, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And everyone, thank you for listening to this episode of a God Shift podcast. Again, I would love it if you would take a screenshot of you listening to this episode, share it on social media, tag us at a God Shift, and be sure to share this episode with your friends and colleagues. And I hope that you will join us again back here next week for another episode. Thank you for being here and take care. Bye-bye.